All right, hi everybody. Nice to see you all. Um, yeah, well, I'm Katie Sikkema. I just left working at SAG-AFTRA after 15 years there. So I'm here to talk about union and non-union, either being a performer or a project developer, how to make the best decision for yourself and your project. Hey. So yeah, as I was saying, yeah, I've been with SAG-AFTRA for 15 years, the last 5 of which I was a senior business representative in the voiceover department, where I was the primary focus on video games. I developed several new contracts and organized new areas of gaming, primarily working with indie developers on creating low budget agreements. So now I'm not with the union anymore. I'm an independent consultant. I work with advising game companies and developers on working with the union and helping them make the best decisions for their projects. And just little legal disclaimer, I no longer work for the union and I don't represent them. This presentation doesn't constitute legal advice or financial consulting or other related professional services. Please contact your lawyer or accountant for your specific situation. All right. So here's just a little headline of what we're going to talk about today. Just sort of the basics of SAG-AFTRA, what the union is and does, sort of the pros and cons of going union and non-union when you are producing a project, and the pros and cons of going union or non-union as a performer. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about sort of special circumstances for the defect performer eligibility and the basics of eligibility, which might sound like it's more focused on performers' needs, but that's actually really important for producers to know about as well, because it can really affect your hiring choices when you're deciding whether to use union or non-union performers. I received some of your questions ahead of time, so I will try to highlight those points as it goes along. Some of the questions I got didn't fit in the scope of the presentation as I laid it out, but we'll try to get to those at the end. All right. So what is SAG-AFTRA? SAG-AFTRA is a labor union, which means that they negotiate collective bargaining agreements on the behalf of their members. So that means that the membership agrees together on the minimum terms and conditions that they are willing to accept when they work on a project. Can I just get maybe sort of a like thumbs up in the chat or something like that? Are you guys mostly performers, mostly producers? And for our producers producing games or other projects, just so I kind of know what to focus on?
A lot of performers.
All right, mostly performers. Okay, so we'll spend a little bit more time on that part of things. So sort of the big question is, why do producers need to work with the union? Well, it's the first rule of union membership that once a performer joins, they're not allowed to work on projects that aren't signed to an agreement with SAG-AFTRA. Producers need to sign an agreement with the union, which we refer to as becoming signatory, agreeing to work performers under the terms and conditions of the aforementioned collective bargaining agreement. So the primary reason that a producer would need to sign with the union is that access to talent. So factors to consider when deciding whether to make a project union. Yeah, access to talent is the big thing. So the question is, do you already know which performers you want to use? If you want to pursue a named talent, someone who's been in other video games, has, a reputation with, a fan following, and has a substantial career, they're probably already in the union. So you'll need to sign in order to use them. If you want to use someone who's not a performer in your otherwise union game, for example, I've seen a lot more people wanting to use influencers or, game streamers, let's players, or appear in their own games. That can make the situation a little bit more complicated. And then another question when you're, considering using someone like an influencer or a let's player is, sort of what's the value add of having them in your project? Do they, does their style and tone fit your project and enhance it? Do they have the fan following that might get some more interest in your game? You know, it might take some extra steps to hire someone who fits that description if you're making the project union, but if you don't, it might cut you off from other options if there's other performers who are union that you want to use. So besides access to talent, the other big factor to consider, I think probably fairly obviously, is the money factor. Is can you afford the union minimum rates? You also have to consider payroll taxes, agency fees, and the health plan contribution. Because performers, when they're working on a video game or a TV project, they get their health insurance from the union. When I worked at the union, I got my health insurance from them because I went in and worked in an office every day. But we're not going to expect a video game producer who's hiring a performer for maybe a couple of days to have a health insurance policy that's going to cover someone who's just working for them for a short period. So instead, the producer makes a contribution to the union on their behalf, and the union handles the administration of their insurance. Although technically the health plan is a separate company from the union, but sort of in that bubble. All right. So benefits and drawbacks of making your project union. As we said before, the main union pro is access to name talent. Someone who's going to have a reputation, a fan following, already has robust credits, can lend more, in addition to being talented performers, can lend more credibility to your project. Also, union performers in general tend to be more experienced. They're likely to have worked in a booth, know how a session runs, so they'll be more efficient. They'll be able to take direction more quickly and do more distinct character voices. If you have a situation where it would be helpful to have one person voicing multiple roles, they're going to have a greater breadth of roles and characters that they can do for you. Also, you get the benefit of the years of experience that comes with negotiating the union contract. It's negotiated with top game companies like EA, Activision, Warner Brothers. So they've experienced so many of the scenarios that can come up in gaming. So you don't have to think of anything that might possibly come up and try to remember to put it in your contract. It's a situation that's probably been dealt with and it's in the contract because it's something that people are dealing with on set every day. And the bargaining agreements go both ways. The union acts on behalf of the performers, but it's helpful on both sides for people to know their rights and responsibilities. And then some of the drawbacks of making your project union is, in general, there's a few contracts that this doesn't apply to, but especially when it comes to video game contracts, again, that being my main focus, you can't mix and match your cast. Everyone has to be covered as union, which isn't to say that you can't hire someone who's not already a union member. And we'll circle back to that more in depth later in the hiring and eligibility portion of the conversation. It just means that you can't pick and choose who is paid union rates on your project. Everyone gets the same minimums regardless of their union status. Obviously, more paperwork and costs involved. You need to go through the steps of making the union signatory. You may need to pay the health plan contribution. You may have difficulty getting responsive assistance. If you have a tight turnaround time, the union's really busy. So if you're trying to do something quickly, they might not be as agile as you need to be in order to meet your deadlines. And then if you have a really specific circumstance or unique project, the contract might just not end up being a good fit for you. If there's something in the contract that doesn't work for your project, you can always ask for a waiver. But technology is innovating all the time. I'm seeing all kinds of unique new projects that sort of defy genres and categorization. So it just might be hard to find a union contract that's going to make sense for what you're doing if you've got something that's really outside of your typical video game project or your typical TV show, for example. And then the benefits versus drawbacks of going non-union. So non-union pros, as we were saying, you might have more budget constraints when you're going union. If you're non-union, you can pay whatever works best for your project. You can craft the contract that best fits your game. If, what's the union has to offer doesn't fit for what you're doing, and you've got a huge talent pool available. I think the SAG-AFTRA membership is currently about 350,000. I couldn't even begin to guess how many union performers are available above and beyond that. And obviously the fact that so many more people are able to work remotely from home studios has really opened up the availability of performers and the ability of people in different geographic areas to work together. But then some of the drawbacks of going non-union is, if you do have to craft your own contract, if you don't have good legal assistance, you might leave something out that's important and, sort of run into a problem later. You have a larger pool of actors available to you, but that means that you might have to comb through auditions of questionable quality. If it's just someone who, doesn't have any voice acting experience but has an iPhone and records a demo. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to get work on Fiverr, and I can't tell you how many people called me when they were at the union and just, saying like, cool, I want to be a voice actor. What do I do? And I'm like, have you taken any classes? No. Okay, you're putting the cart before the horse. And then obviously, most of your name talent is going to be union, so you might lose access to, more known performers that you want to use. Or if you have sort of an ongoing game or franchise and your performer has a really up and coming career, if their career takes off, you might lose access to them. If you want to keep your project non-union, but they become union in the future, you might need to think about converting the project, or if you're making sequels or other follow-ups. If that performer becomes union, you might not be able to keep working with them. So things that you should keep in mind, regardless of whether your project is union or not. The main thing is federal labor laws. And a lot of federal labor laws are already incorporated into the union contract. So if you're signed to the union contract, you probably don't have to worry about a lot of that stuff. But you're going to have to think about it a little bit more if you're making your own contracts or working with a template or something like that. The first thing that I see producers get wrong a lot is the concept of 1099ing their performers or paying them as an independent contractor. Just because you're not subject to union requirements doesn't mean that you can 1099 them, because a 1099 does not an independent contractor make. Most states follow the rule that if a worker can decide when and how to do their job, that means that they're a contractor. So performers don't apply, because they're not going to show up whenever they want with whatever script they want. You're going to tell them that we're recording at 3 p.m. and here's your pages. In California, the rules for what qualifies an independent contractor is a little bit different because of some rules that came into place because of gig economy and rideshare companies. Now, workers who are engaging in the main business of the company, so in this case, making a movie or a video game, are considered employees and not independent contractors. And the SAG-AFTRA agreements specifically state that performers are considered employees. So if you're signed to a union agreement, you can't 1099 them regardless, because the contract states that they're employees. Also, as I was saying, the union encapsulates a lot of labor laws and is stricter in some places. So the only things that you would have to really worry about outside of that are things like permits, insurance. But if you're not signed, then you need to think on your own about, you can pay whatever you want, but you still have to keep in mind minimum wage laws, rules about pay for overtime, giving performers breaks after a certain amount of work, and use of minors, especially if you're in California. The rules for hiring minors are even stricter than they are the strictest in the United States, and they are stricter than what is in the union contract currently. And then just certain logistical things that you should keep in mind if whether you're signed to a union agreement or not. And this is more from the perspective of recording for video games, which is usually audio work. that whether you're having your performers record at home using their home setup, or are you renting a studio or an audio house, because audio houses can provide a lot of services other than just being a recording studio. They might handle your payroll for you, editing, casting services, and some payroll or some audio houses will even be your union signatory. If you have your performers recording at home, are you just having them send you your finished recording, or are you patching in over Zoom or Skype or something to provide feedback and make sure that the session is completed in a timely manner? And this is just, from my personal experience of hearing what issues my producers have been through. I strongly recommend that you sit in on the session and don't have them just send you the files unless it's someone that you really know and have a relationship with. So that you can control the length of the session and don't waste time and money if they're not taking the character in the direction that you want, or if they're having audio issues and the recording's not coming out that well. All right, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit now from the producing part of the presentation and talk a little bit about deciding whether to become a member if you're a performer. So, main question is, are you ready to join? Does your career demand it, or are you not getting that many union jobs yet? Because just again, like this is a personal anecdote, but I know way too many people who moved to LA straight out of college, did their 3 minimum background jobs that they needed to become eligible, joined the union immediately, and then stopped working. Because they committed themselves way too fast and they hadn't yet built up the connections or the resume. And I went to Emerson College in Boston, and they have a campus in LA. So a lot of people would do the LA program, spend a semester, and then, oh, I see someone waving at me. Did you go there? Yeah. But I had just a random talk at my college where a recent graduate came back and who had done very well. She'd been working professionally in theater basically since she graduated. And she came back to do a little talk about her career had been going. And this was the first time that I'd had anyone mention working with a union. I think we all kind of know, like, oh, okay, SAG-AFTRA, if you're going to be an actor, that's something that you have to deal with. But no one really talked about what that meant. And the advice that she gave was that you should wait until you have to join the union. And just from my personal experience, what I've seen from other performers is I agree. If you become eligible, you can stay eligible, and your people will know that they can hire you if you've got a union project. And then if you're getting hired regularly on union projects, then you can join when you become a must join, and we'll talk about what that means later. But if you're not getting enough jobs that makes sense for you, you can stay eligible and kind of keep your options open. Once you've reached the point of being a must pay, hopefully that means that your career has progressed enough that it's a logical next step for you to join the union when you get there. And then, are you in an area with a lot of union opportunities? There's a lot of places with great tax incentives where more things are filming right day. Like if you're in LA, it's pretty obvious that everything working around there is going to be union. But if your area doesn't get a lot of union projects, then you might be kind of cutting yourself off. And then the question of, do you have the $3,000 joining fees plus dues? You can also finance. You don't have to pay the $3,000 up front. You can finance through the credit union, but that is opening a line of credit. So that depends on what your own personal financial situation looks like. Also, every once in a while, if the production feels really passionately about someone, I have seen people get sponsored. The company that's hiring them will put up the dues. If they're really passionate about the person that they're hiring, that they're like, oh yeah, this person's going to be a big star. They're our next big thing. So if they really believe in you, sometimes that happens. So let's talk a little bit about what the union can do for you, because, I think a lot of people who certainly my background in theater school before I started working with the union was just, I knew that they put it on an award show, and if you wanted to be an actor, you had to join, but I didn't really know what that meant or entailed. And the first bullet point I have on here is of membership benefits is what I think is the biggest benefit, but also maybe the one that performers underestimate the most, is the idea of having someone to intervene on your behalf. Because the union's not just there to, negotiate a contract every couple of years and run an award show. A lot of performers are afraid to make noise or cause trouble because they don't want a reputation for being high maintenance or not get hired back by an employer. And I've had way too many performers tell me that they haven't been paid for months, which risks out running out the statute of limitations, which is 6 months for most contracts, by the way, because they're afraid to say anything. This is where the union can step in, and often, the union reps are good at finding a way to keep your name out of it. So if you're having a problem on set, or it's been months and you haven't been paid, but you don't want a reputation as a troublemaker, the reps at the union can probably find a way to be like, oh, I'm just casually doing a payroll audit, and oh, look, I noticed that this performer has been paid for this period. Whoops. Or I love a group claim if I can find an issue that's affecting the entire cast, because especially with issues like if you didn't get paid, like you're probably not the only person who got overlooked. And then, you can help everybody. And, that was sort of my thing, was like being at the union, like I'll be the bad guy. Like that is my job. Like I will get in there and get your producers to do the right thing and leave you out of it. Yeah, so that's like the main thing that the union does, is enforcing these contracts on your behalf. So you shouldn't be afraid to reach out to your union if something is owed to you, because like they'll take care of it. As I mentioned before, they'll cover health insurance, also a pension. There's very few industries these days where you still have the potential of earning a pension once you retire. You get to vote on contracts and board members. You get to decide and craft these contracts and have a voice in what kinds of terms and conditions you're willing to accept, and raise the issues that you're dealing with on set to make things, safer and more equitable for you and your fellow performers. And yes, you do get to vote on the SAG Awards and get those sweet, sweet screeners. There's also workshops and events. There's casting workshops. There's things where you can get additional training or learn from your fellow professional performers. There's recording facilities in both New York and LA. I know in LA, it's the Don LaFontaine voiceover studio. I don't remember off the top of my head what the one in New York is called. Where they not only teach classes, but you can go in there and use their equipment to record a demo or record an audition, which is great if they're drilling in your parking lot and your home studio closet isn't working out for you. Also, you have access to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, which can provide emergency financial assistance. I've known people who've, the emergency financial assistance has stepped in with someone needed to, pay for dental work or pay their rent for a month. Like those things are available to you. So let's talk a little bit about some of the special circumstances that I mentioned before. And the first one is maybe one of the most confusing. So I'll do my best to break it down to you as possible. And don't come at me for the typo in this. I got this picture from the US Department of Labor. That is their typo. So there is a series of laws called right to work states, and labor unions have less power in a right to work state. So what that means is that you can, if you're in one of these states highlighted in red, and this map was actually just updated because Michigan used to be a right to work state and now it's not. It just switched like a couple weeks ago. So if you live and work in a right to work state, you can work a union job, but you actually never have to join the union. You can still earn health insurance and qualify for a pension, but you'll never have to pay joining fees or dues. If you work in a right to work state, that can trigger, if you work in a non-right to work state, that can trigger your must pay status. So if you live in Texas, they fly you out to LA for a job, and you've already, become eligible from other work in Texas, or your eligibility has progressed that far from other jobs, working outside of that area can trigger your must pay status. So that's something to keep in mind if you're in one of those states and contemplating taking a job in another area, if that job will be worth it for you. And then if you are based in a right to work state, be careful if you ever do remote work. Again, just going with the same example, if you live in Texas and you take an anime dubbing job that's based in LA, make sure when they cast clear you that they code you correctly so that they don't mess up your status and accidentally trigger a must pay. I've had to call people out on that a bunch of times. And then if you are already a union member and you travel to another state to work, so, going the other way, if you are based in California and you fly out to Texas to do a job, even though Texas is a right to work state, you are still a union member. And that rule one that I mentioned earlier, that the first rule of your membership is that you can't work non-union jobs, that follows you. So if you were to fly out to a right to work state to work a job there, that job would still have to be union. And then the next thing I got a lot of questions about is, what is FICOR? And this is sort of like the clickbaity question, like the one crazy trick the experts don't want you to know about, but it's a big decision and kind of nuanced. So we'll talk about that. So the terminology is FICOR, but at least internally, the proper name for it is a fee-paying non-member. And it essentially means that you have quit the union. You are still required to pay dues because you are still getting the benefit of union contract when you're working on union jobs, but you are not bound by Rule 1. So you can work union jobs and you can still receive insurance, but you don't get those other benefits that I listed on before in terms of voting in elections, or awards, no screeners for you. You can't serve on committees, you can't attend the special events or use the facilities. And also, just a lot of people have a negative view of being FICOR. Like it's a big and personal decision, and I wouldn't want to judge anyone's personal financial circumstances. But it's also, you can't easily change your mind once you become FICOR. Like if you decide that you feel really passionately about your industry and you want to have more of a voice, or things are going a certain way and you want to see more union coverage in an area that you work in, you might not be able to just get back in. It's maybe possible if someone is willing to champion for you, but in general, it's a one-way door. So yeah, so if you're FICOR, you can work union and non-union. If you are working a union job in your FICOR, you are still treated as union. So that's also not a selling point. If you're working with a producer and you're like, oh, well, I'm FICOR, so you can just treat me as non-union and pay me, and not pay me. That's not how that works. Yeah, so you open yourself up to maybe more job options. But yeah, there's definitely a stigma that comes with it, and you lose some of those other benefits that you would have as being a member. So yeah, it's a very personal decision. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about Taft-Hartleying and eligibility. And I'll also talk about, that as a performer and what you need to know about that as a producer so that you're making good hiring decisions. And you're going to hear the phrase Taft-Hartley a lot. So let's quickly discuss what that means. The Taft-Hartley is a law that was passed in the US in 1947 that creates rules about how unions are required to operate, such as putting fences around what circumstances they can strike or boycott, requiring them to accept new members, which means being an open shop versus a closed shop. And that's why when you become a new member to join the union, the form that you fill out or is filled out on your behalf is called a Taft-Hartley form, because it's referring to that rule about how unions are required to work. So yeah, the first thing being, the union is not a closed shop. So that means that they are required to accept new members, and they can't tell producers that you're not allowed to hire a certain person. All they can do is set requirements for what exceptions to the preference of employment clause. So there's a clause in the agreement called preference of employment that requires producers to give preference to SAG-AFTRA members when deciding who to hire, with a list of specific exceptions. The main exception under which most performers are Taft-Hartleyed is that they are already a professional performer who's seeking, employment in the industry. You've gone to acting school, you've done other plays or short films, you've got a headshot and resume. And this just happens to be your first union job. So that's how most people get in, because everyone's got to start somewhere. And then there's a few other specific exceptions for, if you need someone with a unique appearance, or a special skill, or if you're doing a film, and there's a scene on a construction site, you might want to, and if you want some of the equipment to be used, you might need to hire the person that uses that equipment. So those are the kinds of things that are the exception to the preference of employment clause. So if you hire a performer and you're a producer and they don't, so the union can't tell you not to hire someone, but if they don't qualify for one of those specific exceptions, then the union can fine you. But they can't tell you that you can't use them, because if that person lost a job, the union could actually be liable for losing them their employment opportunity. So that's kind of a good and bad thing, because it means that you're allowed to hire exactly who you want to hire. But the bad thing is, you might not have, if you're a smaller production, you might not have the budget to eat the cost of a Taft-Hartley fine. So, they can't warn you if you're about to make a costly decision. And then also I wanted to highlight union security, which also means that is the rule that members who are hired must be in good standing, that everyone has to be paid up on their union dues before when they're working on a project. So how do you get your eligibility? So it's either you get 3 background vouchers or 1 principal contract for a minimum of 1 day of principal work. And not every project will make you eligible. Some projects allow a certain number of background performers to be non-union after they've reached a quota. And then some super low budget projects, as long as they're not being made for commercial purposes, things under the micro budget agreement, don't create eligibility. On projects like that, you can have a mixed cast. I think that's maybe the only contract left where you can still have a mixed cast, that you have some performers that are union and they just stay non-union, but the performers would not get their eligibility from that contract. And background and extras in this context are synonymous. And then a principal role means that you have a scripted speaking line, which is sort of a general baseline. You will occasionally have a principal role who doesn't have any lines. There's someone who steps out from the background. They're probably named in the script or featured in some way. But the general baseline rule is if you have a scripted speaking line, then you're not an extra anymore. You are a principal. Okay, so let's talk about cast clearance, because this sort of walks you through sort of where you are on your journey of eligibility. In running your cast through the union's cast clearance system, which you'll also hear sort of colloquially referred to as Station 12, but sort of these days everyone generally wants to refer to it as cast clearance. It's not a requirement for producers, but I personally think that it should be, and that's just solely for the producer's benefit, because it can keep you out of trouble. Just as some sort of personal anecdotes, I once saw a production get fined for Taft-Hartleying a performer because the performer said that they weren't a member. They were actually a former member on honorable withdrawal, and they should have paid up their dues and brought their membership back up to date. But because the producer didn't cast clear them, they didn't know that. So there was the producer that got fined in that circumstance. Also, just a hot tip for producers, there is a very firm deadline to turning in your Taft-Hartleys. It's 15 business days, or no, sorry, 15 calendar days. If you're on location, I think it's 25, or if you're in town, 25 if you're doing a location shoot. And you will get fined if you do not turn them in on time. And then if you're a performer who wants to join, and for some reason the producer doesn't submit your Taft-Hartley or doesn't do it on time, make sure that you keep copies of, this is just good business keeping anyway, is make sure that you keep copies of your payment in your contract, because you can submit that to the membership department as proof of eligibility if for whatever reason the producer flakes on filing your Taft-Hartley. So the cast clearance system. This is the system that producers use to check the status of their performers, make sure that everyone's paid up on their dues. And then if you are not a member yet, this is where they'll find out where you are, sort of moves you forward on your journey from not being in the system at all to being a must pay. So the first time you are ever hired on a union job, the producer will get a code back that says NR, which means no report. So you're not in the system, and that is their indication that they need to submit a Taft-Hartley on your behalf. And a Taft-Hartley covers you for 30 calendar days. So regardless of, if that job works you for a couple of days or for the full 30 calendar days, or if you get hired on another job in that period and they cast clear you, you'll still come up as being covered by that initial Taft-Hartley. And that's when you get your eligibility. After the expiration of the first 30-day period, the next time you get cast cleared on a job, you'll get an OK 30. That means that you've got another 30 calendar days to work. The next time after that you get cast cleared on something, that is when you will come up as a must pay. And that means that you've got 5 business days to either pay your joining fee or contact the membership department in the credit union to set up a payment plan to get started on paying your dues. If you're not ready at that time to join, that might just mean that the production is going to decide to pass on hiring you. How to contact the union. Like I said, I was primarily working I was the senior rep in the voiceover department. My primary contracts were the interactive agreement and the dubbing agreement. The voiceover department also handles promos. So if you want to sign a video game, here is their contact information, their general their general phone number, and the voiceover main email and interactive main email and their websites. I also want to highlight a new feature that just went live on their website, I think just maybe a day or two ago, which is this new member toolkit. And I included the URL at the bottom if you want to copy it down or screenshot. And that I spent some time pawing through it, and it's a really convenient sort of one-stop shop for all of the information that you need on member benefits, joining, highlighting the main terms of any contracts that you might get hired on. So for members or people who are contemplating joining, that's a really good resource that they just rolled out. And then I'll give everyone another second if they wanted to copy that down or screenshot it. Okay, getting a thumbs up. And then if you want to contact me, I'm happy to help people out and answer questions. I love helping people and talking about the union. And I'm also available as a consultant through the Help Network to help video game companies or other companies. Like I said, that's just my main niche, is working on the interactive contract, who are trying to decide if union is right for them or negotiating that relationship. You can email me, katie@katiesikkema.com, or there's my phone number and my website. And if you enjoyed this presentation and want more, and we've got about 15 minutes for questions, but there's a lot more that I could talk about. So if you would like me to come back in the future and talk about the process of making a union project, or if there's just other stuff we're not able to get to today, let the Help Network know and we can come back and talk more. All right. Well, with that, I am going to exit the screen share view so I can see all of your lovely faces. And if you have any questions that I wasn't able to get to in a presentation, let's talk.
I see Mariah.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, awesome. Hi, Katie. Thanks so much for coming today. I have a quick question about insurance for the union, or for health insurance. I've heard that you need to make a certain amount of money per year as a performer to qualify for it consistently. How much is that? And in your opinion, how manageable is that when you're just starting out?
Unfortunately, I don't know that one off the top of my head. I'm sure you can find out that information on the health plan's website. If I can find it. If I can find it while I'm talking, I'll pull it up. But I know that during the pandemic, they raised it a little bit because the lack of people paying dues made things sort of, and also just the lack of people working and the contributions weren't coming in. So they raised it a little bit. So just starting out, it's probably even a little harder now than it was. But if you are consistently working and supporting yourself from your acting, then that's probably getting you a little bit closer. But I'll see if I can find that out for you, or you can email me later and I'll see if I can track it down.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
I see Tim.
Oh, hi, Tim.
Hey, what's happening? How are you?
Hey, miss you, buddy.
I know it's been a while. Good to see you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is within this conversation, but can you speak to non-jurisdictional at all? Is that an official thing the union has, or is that kind of one of those things that is kind of an unspoken thing that is not really clear?
That definitely gets complicated. I'll speak to it to the extent that I can.
Okay.
Because I've definitely had some people try to say that like voiceover or certain areas of voiceover are non-jurisdictional. So it's like, oh, you can do that non-union because it's not jurisdictional. I'm like, excuse me, I work in the voiceover department. Like I'm jurisdictioning all over this. What are you talking about? You're definitely not going to find just like, oh, this category of work just isn't covered.
Right. There's not like an actual list of like, this is not jurisdiction. So non-jurisdictional essentially, and this is more just because I had this question, is meaning that there's not a collective bargaining agreement in place for that specific job.
Yeah. So that's only going to apply to like, for example, UN style dubbing.
Okay.
That is the type of dubbing where if you're like watching someone give an interview and you hear the person speak in their own language a little bit, and then someone comes in talking over it, that is not like, that's not covered by the dubbing agreement, because the dubbing agreement is dramatic only. So it has to be scripted. So if you're dubbing over someone who's speaking off the cuff, like that style isn't covered. So that's something that's like,
Gotcha.
yeah, I guess non-jurisdictional because it's not covered.
Okay.
There's also a few specific weird areas in like cable TV. And I, since I'm not with the company anymore, I don't have access to this information anymore. I'm sorry. But there's like a few random cable networks that aren't signed with a union, and I don't entirely understand why it's okay to like why they can use performers and not sign.
Yeah, I know like cable promo stuff like some of that tends to be under that, but it still seems to be like it seems like there's just not really like a clear understanding. Like some things ish are and some things kind of aren't. It seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of been my understanding.
Yeah, it's very fuzzy and gray, and you'll just sort of like bump into one of those weird areas once in a while.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, really? UN style dubbing? That's fine. I can work on that. Like, oh, Discovery Channel?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And I think health insurance, at least my number is 26,470 is what we have for qualifications currently for insurance. And good to see you. Miss you. So
yeah, good to see you too.
I see Brian.
Hey, a lot of this is really confusing for me, but
oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's all right. It's me. Is Taft-Hartley needed in a right to work state? Like, do you need to have that paperwork filled out, or I don't know if I'm even saying that right. So.
Yeah. So if you are doing a union project in a right to work state, the performer would still get Taft-Hartley because they would still get put in the system. They still get the benefit of the contract. They're still covered. They just don't ever have to pay. They don't have to join off of that Taft-Hartley if they don't want to.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I see Mr. Leaf with his hand up.
Howdy, this is probably a slam dunk of a question, but do you mind if I share this in the two communities? Because I'm on both sides of this. I'm a part of Seattle independent game folks. There's a ton of us. Oh my gosh. And also do you mind if I share the SAG stuff and your contact information for other folks who might be producers and or trying to get in the biz of the acting?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are exactly the people that I enjoy helping. A big part of what I was doing at the union was helping people, especially who were in the indie gaming community, sort of break through that barrier to entry when it comes to making their games union. So yeah, I would hopefully this would be helpful to them. So I'd love for them to see it.
Right on.
Yeah. And I see a hand up for Cynthia.
Okay, hi. So, this is all still like really new to me since I'm a college student. So for me, like, I guess like I'm trying to be like proactive, like in college. Like, I take a ton of voice acting classes. I'm actually going to UCLA this summer for a voiceover camera acting program. But I'm like, one of the things that like I'm still like so confused about because like my teachers don't like talk about it is like what are like the next steps like after college, would you suggest?
There might be other people in in the chat that could speak to that maybe a little bit better than I can, because there's a lot of different paths, and there depends a little bit on what you're interested in, but also sometimes what you're interested in isn't necessarily where you find yourself. There's tons of networking opportunities. If you're, it sounds like you're specifically interested in voice work, and Mr. Tim Friedlander, who I know on my screen, he is in the box directly to my left. He runs a group called NAVA that is the, Tim, I'm gonna let you say what the name is because I'm gonna
National
up the acronym.
Association of Voice Actors.
There we go.
We actually work with Help Network. Help Network works with us on a lot of things. And if you're in LA, there are so many resources in LA for voice actors. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, so like the classes are great, especially because a lot of the voice acting classes in the area, and especially through Help Network, are run through people who also cast, who also direct. So I think just getting out there, getting involved with people, making sure that you've got stuff to show, like, have something that you can point people to when they're interested in your work. Have a demo, have a website. Make sure there is a place for people to find you. Once you get out to these events, go to and network with people. Make sure there's a place for them to track you down afterwards. And for the love of God, always put your phone number and your email address in every professional correspondence that you send. Make sure that people can, if anyone just like thinks of your name, oh, Cynthia, she was great. They need to be able to find your website. They need to be able to contact you.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I do have another question, actually.
Yeah, sure.
That's okay. And this might be a little bit maybe beyond the scope of this. The interactive contract has run out, correct? Or is in or at least the current contract we had with SAG-AFTRA?
The interactive
Contract?
Yeah, it expired in November. It is currently in negotiations. And the last round of negotiations was early March. I'm not sure when the next round is scheduled for. So it's just that contract is just extended until a new contract is ready.
So it doesn't mean that like doesn't mean the contracts have expired and there's just nothing out there. Right. Okay. That's what I thought. So those contracts just essentially are just everything is just still considered in place and just extended until a new one comes in and takes its place.
Exactly. If that were to any circumstance where there wouldn't be a contract available to sign, the union would have to give like 30. It might be even longer notice than that, because for those that don't recall, we had a rather long strike in 2016, and they had to give a good amount of notice that they intended to terminate the contract. Most contracts is 30 days. That one, it might have been even longer. It might have been like 60 or 90 days. So there was a strike because the contract had expired, but companies did have an option to sign on to an interim contract that was called the promulgated agreement. Promulgated just means non-negotiated. So I don't think it's going to go that way. I think that that they'll get to an agreement, but you would have plenty of notice if the contract were to be terminated without extension or interim.
Okay, so from a performer standpoint, there's no risk of like any of these contracts falling out of like losing your benefits or something like that. I know it's pretty far.
No.
Cool.
Yeah.
I see Brian again. Brian?
Just kind of along that line, I don't really get to ask questions about a lot of union stuff. Is there talk about adding residuals into the interactive contracts, or is
So
that out of this?
That was a big topic of conversation at the 2016 negotiation that resulted in the strike, because there was absolutely nothing in the interactive agreements, no sort of secondary payment.
Mm-hmm.
And what came out of that negotiation was the additional compensation structure that's in the agreement now, that rather than a traditional residual, because what we heard from the game companies was that their projects just don't monetize the way, a TV show that goes into reruns, or, you can buy the season on DVD, or, download the season on iTunes or something like that does. That what worked better for them was an incremental bonus payment based on the number of sessions that a performer works on a game, because your average performer is only going to work maybe 1 to 3 sessions on a game, and then your big leads are going to be working for weeks or months. So it's sort of a tiered system, so that performers that have more of a contribution to the game get more of a financial contribution back, or compensation. So it starts at $75 for the first session, and it goes up a little bit each time. It's like $125 for the second session, $175 for the next session after that, and it goes up a little bit each time, and caps out after the 10th session. So if you're working more than 10 sessions on a game, then you won't earn anything beyond that. But presumably, if you are working that much on a game, you're probably one of the big leads, and you've negotiated a larger overall deal, or at least that's the sort of philosophy behind why that determination was made. So that's what was implemented in the contract in 2017. And that's, something that I think that you can expect to see people want increased. I don't think that there's going to be any look at changing it to a more traditional residual model. I think the feedback from the gaming industry is that this structure still fits the way games are monetized the best. But there's definitely an interest in seeing those, like, okay, we've got this in the agreement, now let's see it grow.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any questions in the chat that we've missed? Make sure that
I don't believe so, but if there are no other questions, I don't know if people are like stewing. Oh, there we go. Lauren.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, do animation contracts include residuals as well?
yes.
Okay.
Sort of the general animation contracts, yes. Dubbing for animation has a buyout option. So it's typically like for the dubbing agreement, it's 87 upfront, and then you can buy out residuals at an additional 50% of scale. So the full, and it's based on an hourly, not a daily, with a minimum 2 hour. It's about to go up to 3 hour minimum in the Netflix agreement. So, your initial hourly is 87 plus 50% for the buyout, which is about $127.50. So for a 2 hour minimum session under a typical animation dubbing contract, you're going to see about $300 for just sort of a minimum 1 day session rate. But yeah, and any general original animation earns residuals in sort of a traditional way.
I have another question, actually.
Yeah.
So can the union do anything about a project that's non-union, but it's being broadcasted on a large network?
I mean, I think it's always worth it to try. Bring it up to the union rep there's an organizing department at the union, and their job is sort of to go out to communities or industries that are struggling with getting their work covered. So you could talk to the organizing department or the contracts department for that specific area. For original animation, that would be covered by the entertainment contracts department. I think the manager of that department is Tim Kuhl, Kuhl. So that would be a great place to get started. And, you know, they can always reach out to a company and ask them, like, we would love to get your work covered. What's stopping you guys? What do you need? Is there something, you know, because maybe like there's something that can be tweaked that, you know, what's the pain point to get that work covered? So yeah, reach out to the union, ask them if organizing or the contracts department can reach out to them. Or if you have a contact, you know, if you see them casting, like forward the casting notice. You know, it's always great if they're like, if we don't have to cold call someone, if you have contact information that you can pass along. And obviously like the union doesn't have to say like, Lauren reached out to us, just like, oh, we saw this on the
Yeah.
oh, we saw this at the casting networks and now this is non-union. Oh, we would love to get it covered. You know, what can we do? How can we help? It's definitely worth a shot.
Usually do casting directors handle that first before they actually start casting, or is it like sort of up to the casting director to decide whether they want to do that, and then it comes to us and then we decide whether we want to do that?
So you mean up to whether they make the project union or?
Yeah, like contacting, because so I worked on this project and what the casting director told me was that they couldn't negotiate with the client for a better pay because the client's not based in the US, but it's a major title. And yeah, so I was wondering, I don't know how it worked for the project because I'm just really confused, like who, what, how. Yeah.
I mean, the producer not being based in the US really has like nothing to do with whether they can negotiate. It's probably whatever their project pipeline is that the foreign company decided how much they were willing to spend on having the project recorded. And there was probably a US audio house that, you know, probably a couple of audio houses bid on, I can record your anime for, you know, $12,500 or $125,000 or whatever. And they took the best deal, and then they are structuring the pay within the budget. So so probably just saying like, oh, they're foreign, so we can't negotiate is an oversimplification. It's we have already committed the amount of money we are willing to spend on this contract. I would also say I would not expect a casting director to negotiate on your behalf.
Or I was
because
they
work for the producer. They're probably trying to get everything.
I see. Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering like who does who does the responsibility fall on, kind of thing, to make this, you know, to justify the pay.
I mean, if when it comes to negotiating your personal salary, that's you or your agents.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. You know, the union sets the contract minimum, saying like, you know, everyone who works on this project agrees that they are not going to accept less than, you know, let's go with the dubbing example and say the 87 an hour, because you don't want to see performers undercutting each other. Which is kind of what's happening in my aforementioned example of the audio houses is, you know, everyone's trying to get the work done for more cheaply, sometimes even taking a loss to get the work covered. So yeah, it's the union's job to set the minimum so that you don't have, you know, people basically like pricing themselves out of the business. And then, yeah, the casting director, they work on behalf of the production to find the performers. They're going to be negotiating against you or your agent. Yeah, they're not there to get you a good salary. They're there to find the performers for the production at the price that the production wants to pay.
Okay, I see.
Does that help?
Yeah. Another thing that came to mind was because I'm non-union, so would you know, approaching the union with this problem help me at all?
I I mean, yeah, if you the work gets covered as union and then you theoretically still get cast in the project, you would get a Taft-Hartley off of that. Or if you've already been Taft-Hartley previously, it would sort of advance you in the steps, but you would get the protection of a union contract that, as I discussed before, comes with the union being there. Like if you worked on a union project, even if you don't join yet, the union is still there to protect your work.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're working on something, the project's signed to the union, it makes you eligible, but you don't join yet. If you have a problem, if you don't get paid on time, if you have a hard time on set, something else unfair in your contract is happening, the union is still there to help you, even if you haven't actually joined as a member yet. You still get the benefit of that contract. So getting a project union and getting cast in it will still help you in that regard.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask this question in chat, and then Keely, you could be our last question. All right, so the question is, can you work on a non-union project that was started prior to joining SAG as a must join? Example, final session for a yet to be released game.
So it sounds like if you were already working on something that was non-union and you join, but you still have more work to do on the non-union thing, if I'm realize that you can't really interpret that for me because you're not the one who had the question. But basically, once you join, you lose your ability to work on non-union projects, whether you were already committed to it prior to your eligibility or not. That would be a violation of Rule 1.
I'm going to assume that you've answered that question. Keely, would you like to be our last question?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Katie. Very much appreciate this. So that was part of my question. The thing is that I remember it. I've done classes on SAG-AFTRA for like the last 5 years sporadically, trying to like remember all of the new things that come up, but then sometimes we forget because I'm still non-union. So that was one of the other things is that when it's non-union, if you're in the union, this is why I put it off, is that then I can no longer do non-union work because you need to do union work if you're in the union. But isn't there some sort of like exception to the rule, as if you work on a non-union project, then the project would just have to become union and pay everybody union? Is that
maybe? I personally I love flipping a non-union project to union, but there has been some pressure from upper management to do that less.
Okay. Yeah, but that's really the only case in which it works, right?
I think maybe we got a little too conversion happy. I certainly haven't had it cause any problems, but maybe it has in other contract areas. That the circumstances have to make sense in terms of, what's the exposure on the work that's already been done, and then how much work does it have the possibility to create for the membership. If it's, we've already done all of this non-union work with all these non-union people and we just want to add this one union voice, maybe, if it's going to be an issue of covering a lot of people that wouldn't qualify for a Taft-Hartley exception, like, oh yeah, we're going to do way more work with all of my college buddies that worked on the engineering and coding for this game, but none of them have a voice acting background and none of them want to join the union, but you're going to have to cover all of them. Maybe not. So you would have to make a good case to the committee for the contract area that's covered, because each contract area has a standing committee of performers who are professionals that regularly work in that industry, and they hear out waiver requests. So for something like a project that's already working, that, if a circumstance like that, like a performer has gone union and they want to keep using them, you just have to make like a really thoughtful, well-written and detailed pitch for why they should allow the project to convert to union in that circumstance, and maybe have a plan in place for, do you owe back pay in terms of paying up the difference in non-union versus union rates, or like, do the previous performers have the potential to be Taft-Hartley and become members in the future? So it's a strong maybe on that.
Yeah. General rule: if you're in the union, you do union jobs. You don't do non-union jobs.
Yeah.
Is what I've always been told. So that's just kind of generally there. Barely, likely no exception to that.
Yeah, but
Is
like
what you're saying.
Yeah, and definitely one of the circumstances where it's better to ask permission than forgiveness. But if you have a thoughtful and solid plan, it's definitely worth asking.
Okay. The other part of my question was actually just a clarification on your CAS clearance bit you went over. Because as I understand this, it's one of those things that it's like I feel like I remember it, but then I'm like, it's hazy.
Oh, no. Like I think I worked at the union like 7 years before I even felt like I had my mind wrapped around it. And like each of the contracts,
it's a lot of information.
So much information. I started out in the theatrical department, so primarily signing like feature films, but also like every tier of short films from student films up through major studio franchises. And that contract is like 500 pages. And it's it started in 1938, and they've never taken anything out. There's still references to telegraphs and traveling on the upper berth on a ship. So yeah,
love it.
It takes a long time to wrap your head around. So no one should ever feeling bad for like having trouble with any of these concepts or not being able to recall these very detailed legal contracts off of the top of their head.
I just want to clarify, because I'm like, okay, I think I know it. I think I know it, but let's just make sure I got it. I got it right. So your first time, they have to Taft-Hartley you, and then on that first job, it's good for 30 days. So if you work that job, or if you worked another new union job within the 30 days, then you're good, right? And then after that is up, then you'd have to apply like a second time for this, 30 days or more thing. Whatever it is. So they give you 30 more days to work another job.
When you get hired on a union job after that 30 days is expired, you get another 30 days.
Okay, and then the third job after that 30 days is up, unless you get more work within that 30 days. The third time, before you can start that job, you have to pay, or is it after that job you pay?
No, it's on that third job.
Okay. So on that third job, you have to pay before you can start work. Okay. I have to know what I'm getting into here, Katie. I'm like,
yes,
I gotta
absolutely.
be prepared, because I know it's gonna hit me like a freight train one day. Someone will show up and be like, union job, go, and I'll be like, bah!
Yeah, it's just gonna be there, and you're gonna have to do it. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome. All right. Well, I think that's time.
Yeah, it looks like that is our last question. Thank you, Katie, for everything.
You're welcome.
If anyone wants more, please email classes@helpnet.com, or I think most of you have my email because I sent out the Zoom link. So feel free to just hit us up and let us know what you would like, and check out our website, helpacademy.com, for our classes. Any last words, Katie?
It was lovely seeing all you guys. I hope everyone felt like they learned a lot today, and let me know if you want to hear more. I'd be happy to come back.
Awesome. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.